Property boom taking hold in former Olympics host city. Newly built housing costs in Sochi have soared nearly 190% since 2020, industry data shows. New home prices in Russia's largest resort city, Sochi, have risen threefold in the 3 years to April 2023, driven by strong investor demand, Kommersant Business Daily has reported. Citing data by Netvex Group, the outlet reports the average price for new real estate exceeded 445,000 rubles, $5,550, per square meter last month, compared to 154,600 rubles, $1,931, in April 2020, representing a 188% jump. Sochi, which hosted the 2014 Winter Olympics, recently beat out New York and London in a list of the world's 3 cities with the most expensive luxury housing. According to estimates by the consulting company NF Group, 29 square meters, SQM, of prime property could be bought for $1 million in the Russian city in 2023, with the same budget buying 33 SQM in New York and 34 SQM in London. According to Netvex, 80% of real estate in the Black Sea resort city was initially bought by investors for the purpose of resale. Today, investors make their choice in favor of a business based on renting out housing. First of all, it's profitable. By purchasing an apartment with a mortgage and then renting it out, the client covers his monthly payment, said the owner of Netvex Group Yulia Kludnova. Secondly, the yield from one elite-class property in Sochi can reach 18% per annum. Thirdly, by buying real estate in the resort, the client acquires a ready-made business that does not require any extra effort, whereas the hotelier manages the room, and the investor simply receives his income, she explained. Kommersant noted that prices for resort real estate continue to grow. Sochi's prosperity is remarkable considering the negative coverage the city received in the run-up to the 2014 Winter Games. Western news outlets and social media were filled with hotel horror stories. A tweet by BBC journalist Steve Rosenberg showing a twin toilet in the men's bathroom at an Olympics venue went viral, sparking a wave of Sochi toilet humor. Growing international criticism of a new Russian law against gay propaganda sparked ever louder calls to boycott the Sochi Olympics, or to relocate the event to a country that was more amenable to gay rights. Despite all the controversy, the 2014 Olympics was one of the most successful ever, with the host city now reaping the rewards. She stresses unique role of auditing in party's self-reform. Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, CPC, Central Committee, on Tuesday stressed the unique role of auditing in promoting the party's self-reform and called for enhancing the high-quality development of auditing work in the new era. Xi, also Chinese President and Chairman of the Central Military Commission, made the remarks while presiding over the first meeting of the Central Auditing Commission under the 20th CPC Central Committee. He is head of the commission. At the meeting, she urged efforts to strengthen strategic planning and top-level design in the field of auditing and serve the party and the country with effective audit supervision services. The meeting was attended by Chinese Premier Li Qiang and Secretary of the CPC Central Commission for Discipline Inspection Li Shi, both members of the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee and deputy heads of the Central Auditing Commission. The meeting stressed that since the CPC's 19th National Congress, the Central Auditing Commission has promoted the systematic and holistic reconstruction of the audit system and embarked on a new path of audit in line with China's national conditions. The audit work has made historic achievements and undergone historic changes, it noted. In order to do a good job in auditing on the new journey in the new era, the general requirement is to focus on building a centralized, unified, comprehensive, authoritative and efficient audit oversight system and giving full play to the role of audit oversight. It stressed that monitoring the implementation of major projects, major strategies, and major moves should be strengthened. Efforts should also be made to keep a close eye on crucial areas such as local government debt, finance, real estate, grain, and energy, safeguard the bottom line of no systemic risks, and give full play to the role of auditing in the fight against corruption, the meeting said. The meeting also noted that the auditing results should be used as a vital reference for officials' assessment, appointment, removal, reward, and punishment. Hungary signs gas purchase agreement with Qatar. Hungary has signed an agreement with Qatar on the purchase of natural gas. The countries plan to develop economic cooperation, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán said after talks with Emir of Qatar Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Over the past year, we have learned that Qatar is a country of key importance for Europe. The European economy has made up for a significant part of the missing Russian gas with LNG coming from here. We agreed on energy cooperation. We will also buy gas from here. It is always better to stand on several legs than on one, Orbán said in a video message from Doha posted on Facebook Star. He also said that after talks, the leaders of Hungary and Qatar also agreed to develop infrastructure and air traffic, cooperate in communications and agriculture, thus opening up a good prospect for Qatar-Hungarian economic cooperation. The Hungarian Prime Minister also said Qatar, like Hungary, is ready to mediate in a peaceful settlement in Ukraine. The Hungarian Foreign Ministry has repeatedly said Hungary is working on diversifying gas supplies to the country, but in the short term it will not be possible to replace Russian energy. In addition to increasing the import of Azerbaijani gas, Hungary is interested in increasing LNG supplies to the country through the terminal in Croatia's KRK and developing a gas field in Romania. Additionally, according to Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó, Budapest, as part of the diversification of supplies, is considering the possibility to import oil from Ecuador in case the overland transit of Russian oil through Ukraine becomes impossible. Earlier, Szijjártó said that during his visit to Qatar capital Doha, an agreement was signed, under which the energy companies of Hungary and Qatar may begin talks on the supply of liquefied natural gas to Hungary in about 3 years. According to him, talks are also ongoing between Hungarian and Omani partners at the level of specialists and enterprises on the possible start of oil and natural gas imports from Oman. Szijjártó stressed that agreements with the Gulf countries on oil and gas supply to Hungary do not mean the abandonment of contracts with Russia, but are aimed at diversification. OECD countries' GDP growth slightly picks up in Q1. Economic growth of the 38 members in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, rose by 0.4% quarter-on-quarter in the first quarter of 2023, according to provisional estimates on Tuesday. This was slightly up from the 0.2% growth in the previous quarter. Quarterly growth rates among countries in the OECD have been weak since the first quarter of 2022, the Intergovernmental Group said on its official website. Among the Group of 7, G7, countries, consisting of the United States, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan, quarter-on-quarter GDP growth remained at 0.3% in the first quarter. GDP growth recovered in Canada, 0.6%, Japan, 0.4%, and France, 0.2%. GDP growth in the UK was unchanged at 0.1%. However, GDP growth slowed in the US to 0.3%, compared with 0.6% last quarter. G7's main economic drivers. The OECD said several G7 countries have published details of the main factors driving the changes in GDP. In Japan, GDP growth in the first quarter was supported by a 0.7% increase in total domestic demand, but a further drop in net exports weighed on growth. By contrast, in France, net exports were the main driver of growth, reflecting a 1.1% increase in exports and a 0.6% drop in imports. In the US, slower GDP growth was attributed to decreased inventory investment despite an acceleration of private consumption growth. In the UK, a fall in government spending and an increase in the trade deficit dampened growth. Elsewhere in the OECD, GDP was above Q4 2019 levels in Q1 2023 in all countries for which data was available except Spain and the Czech Republic. Hungary and Germany quarrel over blocked Ukraine military aid, reports. Budapest has vehemently opposed Europe's arms supplies to Kiev, with Prime Minister Viktor Orban cautioning the European Union in February that it could sleepwalk into an armed conflict with Russia by sending increasingly deadly weapons to Ukraine. Germany and Hungary exchanged some verbal broadsides during a closed-door foreign ministers' gathering in Brussels, a U.S. media report stated. Specifically, the exchange was triggered by the role of the OTP Bank, the National Savings and Commercial Bank of Hungary, in the Ukraine conflict, according to cited unnamed diplomats. Hungary, which has been opposing Europe's arms supplies to the Kiev regime for prolonging the conflict, has refused to approve more EU military aid for Ukraine. As Peter Zicherto reiterated Budapest's stance on the issue, his German counterpart, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, is described as referencing a spate of unspecified reports. These accused OTP of recognizing the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. On September 30, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin and the heads of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, as well as the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, signed agreements on the accession of these territories to Russia, after referendums were held that showed that an overwhelming majority of the local population supported becoming part of Russia. The Hungarian bank was also accused of extending credit lines to Russian soldiers. Peter Zicherto is said to have rejected the accusations targeting the OTP bank, citing a statement released by the company which claimed the reports were not correct. According to those attending the gathering, the exchange was civilized and in a normal framework of the discussion. However, this is said to have followed attempts by Sweden and Estonia at the same meeting to pressure Hungary to stop stalling over more sanctions against Russia. Sanctions contrary to common sense. Earlier, Budapest blocked the release of the eighth tranche of EU military aid to Ukraine worth €500 million, $543 million, via the European Peace Facility, EPF, Brussels sources were cited as saying. Hungary allegedly demanded guarantees that the EPF maintain its global vision in the future and not be used exclusively for arming Kiev. The EPF, set up in March 2021 under the Common Foreign and Security Policy to bolster the EU's role as a global security provider, declares its goals as maintenance of peace and the prevention of conflicts. However, last year, EU member states agreed to use the EPF to fund some of the military supplies to Ukraine. Furthermore, one of the issues currently brought up by some European states is Ukraine's list of private companies it has branded war sponsors. Among these is Hungary's OTP Bank. The Hungarian government will not grant its approval to the next tranche of the European Peace Facility to Ukraine unless Hungary's OTP Bank is removed from this list, Peter Zicherto stated after a meeting with Alexander Schallenberg, his Austrian counterpart, on Monday. Further, serious proposals have been tabled in Brussels, expecting European people to take further sacrifices while they would not bring peace a centimeter closer, he said, according to a cited foreign ministry statement. Peter Zicherto was also quoted as denouncing the EU's planned 11th package of sanctions as fully contrary to common sense, underscoring that the previous 10 had failed. He reportedly also voiced concern about mulled EU measures targeting 8 Chinese companies which could certainly aggravate or even thwart ties with China. Last month, at an EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting in Luxembourg, Peter Zicherto yet again warned that delivery of military aid to Kiev only draws out the conflagration. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has repeatedly lambasted arms manufacturers, raking in massive profits, and Western economic circles who hope to lay their hands on Russia's rich natural resources as the ones interested in seeing the Ukraine conflict rage on. European countries have rustled up 10 sanctions against Russia since Moscow launched its special military operation in Ukraine. They have also threatened to impose secondary sanctions on countries allegedly helping Moscow evade restrictions. Earlier in May, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen unveiled an 11th package of sanctions cobbled together by the European Commission. Besides aiming to add more products to the EU transit ban, it was proposed to combat sanctions circumvention, targeting shadow entities. However, not only have these restrictions become self-harming, backfiring on those who introduced them. They have failed to cripple Russia's economy, as the Western supporters of the proxy war against Moscow in Ukraine had hoped. As for weapons deliveries to Kiev, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said any cargo that contains weapons for Ukraine will become a legitimate target for Russia. How the roof of the world embraces smart agriculture. The 2023 Forum on the Development of Xizang starts in Beijing on Tuesday as the Chinese Autonomous Region begins the adoption of smart agriculture through various pilot projects this year. Dubbed the roof of the world due to its high altitudes, the adverse natural environment in Xizang has made agriculture development particularly challenging. Despite facing those challenges, the region has continued to explore novel ways to boost agricultural productivity. Take Rikazi, the region's agriculture hub, as an example. It produces nearly half of the region's highland barley and has established a big data platform for the highland barley industry this year. Prior to the spring plowing season, digital sensors have been installed on agricultural machinery across the city, utilizing big data analysis in production. To promote the digital transformation in agriculture and animal husbandry, Xizang has initiated pilot projects to build modern technology systems for highland barley cultivation and yak farming, among other industries. It aims to develop smart technology in the agricultural and livestock industry, focus on growing enterprises driven by steady production and supply, and strive to maintain a stable annual grain output of over 1 million tons and a total output value of 7.5 billion yuan, $1.1 billion. Xizang is also actively exploring ways to grow its digital economy. The regional government aims to launch 30 projects to digitize industries, construct digital workshops and intelligent factories, and establish cloud platforms for over 300 companies. These initiatives are expected to lay a solid foundation for high-quality economic development on the plateau. In the first quarter of the year, Xizang achieved a regional GDP of 57.6 billion yuan, an increase of 8.2% year-on-year, ranking among the top regions in the country. What is the Northern Sea Route and how can it turn Russia into an Arctic superpower? Russia plans to increase the tonnage of cargo shipped through the Northern Sea Route, NSR, to 80 million tons by 2024, and to ship up to 270 million tons through the artery annually by 2035. What is the economic and geostrategic significance of the NSR? And why has Moscow invested so much political and material capital into it? Sputnik explores. Russian President Vladimir Putin reiterated the importance of the Northern Sea Route at a ministerial meeting last week, saying climate change has made it an inevitability as he emphasized no expense should be spared on implementing the project. There have always been certain issues which need to be addressed when it comes to financing, but at the same time I want to draw your attention to the fact that the development of the Northern Sea Route is of course one of our clear strategic priorities. And here we probably shouldn't think about saving or cutting anything, given the current situation, Putin stressed. The Northern Sea Route is opening, this is obvious. Colleagues just spoke about climate change, like it or not, it's happening. What is the Northern Sea Route? The Northern Sea Route, also known as Arctic Bridge Sea Route, is an ambitious Russian Arctic maritime transport artery running through the waters of Russia's exclusive economic zone, EEZ, in the far north, stretching from the Sea of Okhotsk and the Bering Sea in the east to the Barents and White Seas in the west. How long is the Northern Sea Route? The approximately 5,600 km route is the shortest maritime route between Europe and Asia, with the ability to shave upwards of 9,000 kilometers off transit from the East China Sea to the North Sea, compared to shipments via the Suez Canal. Once fully operational, the NSR is expected to allow the shipment of goods between Asia and Europe in as little as 19 days, 40%, 60% faster than shipments via the Suez Canal or the Cape of Good Hope, respectively. Why is the Northern Sea Route significant? The Northern Sea Route would allow Russia to become a major player in the transit of trillions of dollars of trade annually, and ease the development and exploitation of Russian territories in the far north, including vast, untapped reserves of oil and gas. According to a 2021 estimate by the Pentagon, the Arctic may contain nearly a third of the world's undiscovered reserves of natural gas, as well as more than $1 trillion of rare earth minerals. It's apparently unacceptable that such wealth belong to any nation besides the U.S., and Washington's fervent opposition to the NSR is a sure sign of its strategic importance. The U.S. Navy has characterized the artery as an attempt to institute the unlawful regulation of maritime traffic, and has threatened to carry out the same kind of freedom of navigation missions in the Russian Arctic as it has in China-claimed waters in the South China Sea. In 2021, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken accused Russia of exploiting climate change to try to exert control over new spaces in the Arctic, including via the modernization of military bases. What can Russia do to thwart unwanted intrusions into the Northern Sea route? Fortunately for Moscow, the task of protecting Russia's northern waters from foreign encroachment has been made easier by the country's outsized spending on military vessels and icebreakers capable of operating in frigid Arctic temperatures, and by decades of U.S. underinvestment by comparison. Earlier this year, for example, it was reported the U.S. Coast Guard was forced to delay the commissioning of a new Polar-class icebreaker until 2027. While Russia's Rosatom flotte signed a contract on the construction of its 6th and 7th Arktika-class nuclear icebreakers, which will join the 50-plus icebreakers of various classes already in operation. For the moment, the United States operates just 2 icebreakers, a state of affairs which should complicate its freedom of navigation ambitions for years to come. Russia has spent decades and billions of dollars shoring up its Arctic infrastructure, building or repairing 16 deep-water ports and 14 airfields, creating a Northern Arctic Military Command, and standing up regional air defense and search and rescue infrastructure to facilitate the security and safety of passage of commercial ships through the NSR. In March, Russia adopted a new foreign policy concept in which the Northern Sea route received a prominent place. According to the document, Russia's major foreign policy priorities include advancing the Arctic transport artery as a competitive national transport corridor, making possible its international use for transportation between Europe and Asia. Russia hopes to establish mutually beneficial cooperation with the non-Arctic states pursuing a constructive policy toward Russia and interested in international activities in the Arctic, including developing infrastructure of the Northern Sea route. Last July, Russia implemented an updated naval doctrine which named the NSR as one of 6 strategic priority directions for improving Russia's status as a great naval power and the strengthening of its position among leading global naval powers. The doctrine lists efforts by some unfriendly governments to weaken Russia's control over the Northern Sea route, including through the growing presence of foreign military infrastructure, as one of the top 10 threats to Russia in the maritime space. What are Russia's near-term plans for the NSR? Last year, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Trutnev announced year-round navigation through the Northern Sea route is expected to become possible as soon as 2024, with Moscow expecting to ramp up cargo traffic along the route to 80 million tons, as agreed by NSR operator Rosatom and its partners. Trutnev urged a dramatic increase in state investment into infrastructure along the route to speed the artery's opening for use in global trade. Rosatom expects cargo transit through the Northern Sea route to grow to 193 million tons per year by 2030, and more than 270 million tons annually by 2035. Russia plans to build dozens of additional ships capable of operating in the frigid waters of the high Arctic, with 41 under construction and 88 still needing to be built, for a total of 158 by the year 2030. Why didn't Russia create the Northern Sea route earlier? Researchers and explorers from the days of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union studied the country's northern regions extensively beginning in the 16th century onward. But it wasn't until climate change and the dramatic retreat of the Arctic polar ice caps from the 2000s onward that Russia received the opportunity to create a global shipping route through its northern waters. Experts say China's plans to deepen unified national market timely. China's plans to further deepen reforms and improve the various measures in establishing a unified domestic market are timely and help the country better deal with challenges, according to experts. On Friday, China's State Council discussed the country's overall plan and recent arrangements for establishing a unified domestic market in an executive meeting chaired by Premier Li Qiang. The cabinet called for the country's implementation of special rectifications on outstanding problems related to local protection and market segmentation in key fields. The meeting also highlighted the importance of greater efforts on deepening reform, with the State Council urging for the further optimization of the protection of property rights, market access, fair competition, social credit, and other basic systems of the market economy. Commenting on the current state of China's markets, political economist David Mahone said that China has already managed to achieve a strong national unified market with unified policies across the country. He told CGTN that it is appropriate to now deepen those policies and make them more consistent with China's development. Meanwhile, Luz Haikan, a senior research fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies of Renmin University of China, said that the country's proposed reforms enable China to better mobilize its resources and take unified actions to deal with challenges in the market. French Parliament begins considering bill on record military budget increase. French National Assembly lawmakers on Monday began consideration of a draft law on military planning for 2024 to 2030, which implies a record increase in the military budget to €413 billion, $446 billion. The government demanded that the bill be considered under an accelerated procedure. Only one reading will be organized in the lower and upper houses of Parliament. The authorities expect to pass the law before July 14. The draft law focuses on the modernization of the army, especially in terms of nuclear deterrence, improvements in the conditions for the military, for which €10 billion will be allocated, equipment upgrades, investment in the protection of cyberspace, space, and the Navy. At the same time, the new budget implies a reduction in heavy weapons, such as tanks and armored personnel carriers. According to Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu, by 2030 the French Army will receive 2,300 Scorpion armored vehicles, 30% fewer than previously planned. The French Air Force will receive 137 Rafale fighter jets instead of 185 and a total of 35 A400M transport aircraft instead of 50. The French Navy will also not receive 2 of the 5 defensive frigates. Spending on equipment, the shortage of which was revealed by arms supplies to Ukraine, will be increased. Ammunition stocks, €16 billion, an increase of 45%, investment in air defense systems, €5 billion. Opposition parties have put forward about 1,700 amendments to the text. They are to be considered within 2 weeks, after which the bill will go to the Senate for consideration. According to the draft law, in 2024 to 2030, the French armed forces will be given an unprecedented budget, according to the defense minister. It will grow to €400 billion, compared to €295 billion allocated in 2019 to 2025. With account for off-budget spending on infrastructure and other items, the total budget of the armed forces should be €413 billion. In 2023, the French military budget is to total €43.9 billion, plus an additional €1.5 billion requested by the defense minister. In 2024, the budget will increase by €3.1 billion, and then will increase by €3 billion each year until 2027. From 2028, the ministry is to receive another €4.3 billion annually. British ex-PM Johnson in Texas to urge Republicans to keep arming Ukraine. Boris Johnson has played a central role in NATO's proxy conflict with Russia and Ukraine. In April 2022 he persuaded President Volodymyr Zelensky to back out of a peace deal. He also persuaded fellow European leaders to arm Kiev and sanction Moscow. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged U.S. Republicans to keep backing Democrat President Joe Biden's arms supplies to Ukraine. The former PM flew to the U.S. state of Texas to address some 24 of the Lone Star states of top conservative politicians, businessmen, and campaign donors. I just urge you all to stick with it. It will pay off massively in the long run, Johnson told the gathering. You are backing the right horse. Ukraine is going to win. They are going to defeat Putin, he insisted, despite news that day that the Russian forces had liberated the key Donbass city of Artyomovsk. Republicans in the U.S. Congress are currently locked in a standoff with the Democratic administration, which insists it must raise its debt ceiling borrowing limit from $1.1 trillion to $1.5 trillion to cover spending approved in the annual budget. More radical Republican representatives and senators openly oppose military aid to Kiev to the tune of at least $48 billion while the U.S. faces multiple crises at home, with some accusing the government of money laundering for Biden, whose son Hunter was made an executive of Ukrainian gas company Burisma. But the octogenarian president has vowed the arms supplies will continue even if the federal government is forced to shut down. Johnson's trip was organized by the Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA, a cross-party, pro-Ukraine Washington lobby group. We wanted to make that case outside of Washington where we all live in a bubble and to really take it to the heartland. To places like Texas, to get more support for Ukraine, and make the case to people who are skeptical about that support, said CEPA's Ukrainian-born president and CEO Alina Polyakova. She added that Johnson enjoyed a lot of credibility as well with the base of the Republican Party because former U.S. President Donald Trump had nice things to say about him when he was the president. Johnson has been one of the most strident supporters on the eastern shores of the Atlantic of Ukraine in its conflict with Russia. In early April 2022 he flew to Kiev to urge Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to break off peace talks with Russia, which were on the verge of a peace agreement brokered by Turkey and Israel. He also persuaded leaders of France, Germany, and Italy, the three biggest European Union economies, to impose economic sanctions on Russia against their country's economic interests. Johnson was forced to resign in the summer of 2022 after Chris Pincher, who he had appointed as deputy chief whip months earlier, groped a fellow Conservative Party MP at a posh private members' club in London's West End. That prompted a mass walkout from his cabinet led by then-Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak. Johnson's reputation had already been damaged by earlier scandals such as Partygate and his expensive refurbishment of the PM's official Downing Street residence at the expense of Conservative Party funds. His successor Liz Truss, another supporter of confrontation with Moscow, resigned after just 6 weeks in Downing Street and was replaced by Sunak, who has twice played host to Zelensky. Tide turning. EU fails to agree on fresh military aid to Kiev. U.S. President Joe Biden announced a new $375 million military aid package for Ukraine on Sunday, but across the Atlantic, Washington's allies are expressing growing hesitancy to dump more cash into a hopeless proxy war with Russia. The European Union's defense ministers failed to agree on a new package of military assistance to Ukraine, EU Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell has announced. We have proposed what will be the eighth package of aid in the amount of €500 million, on which negotiations are continuing. I hope that we will overcome any obstacles one by one to approve assistance at a technical level from this week. Right now we have not reached a unanimous decision on this issue, Borrell said, speaking to reporters after a meeting of the European Defence Agency on Tuesday. The next weeks, the next months will be strategically decisive for the war in Ukraine. We are all in agreement on this. It is precisely for this reason that the European Defence Agency has focused 90% of our funds on our military support, Borrell said. The diplomat did not elaborate on what's holding up the aid talks. However, Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó indicated last week that Budapest would not support an additional €500 million in aid so long as Hungary's OTP Bank remains on a list of sponsors of war over its refusal to leave the Russian market. We cannot support the allocation of another €500 million from the European Peace Facility for arms transfers to Ukraine, and we will not give it the green light as long as OTP is on this particular list, Szijjártó said. Hungary has stood out among EU members over its independent and neutral policy in relation to Russia and the crisis in Ukraine, blocking NATO from shipping weapons to Ukraine through its territory, and refusing to cut off energy and economic links with Moscow. Budapest's policy has led to pressure from Washington and Brussels, and a bitter feud between Hungarian and Ukrainian officials about President Zelensky's mental health, and dismissals by Budapest of Kiev's attempts to lecture Hungary on its foreign policy. Ties between the two countries have been complicated by the 156,000 plus ethnic Hungarians living in western Ukraine, who have been subjected to discrimination by Kiev following the 2014 Euromaidan coup, including prohibitions on their ability to study in their native tongue in state schools via a controversial 2017 education law. Tuesday's news may signal growing divisions within the EU on the Ukrainian crisis amid rising public and economic pressure to end the NATO-Russia proxy conflict, which will enter its 16th month Wednesday. Everybody wants this war to finish, Quarrel assured Monday. The only one that looks willing to continue the war is Putin. No one wishes for peace more than Ukraine, that's why we support the Ukrainians' initiative, the President Zelensky initiative for that just peace, he claimed. Earlier this month, Quarrel admitted that the Ukraine crisis would end immediately in Ukrainian surrender if Brussels halted its military support. That is why we must continue helping Ukraine, he said. U.S. smuggler who claims CIA backed his Kurdish gun factory convicted of torture. A con man who spent years attempting to manufacture illegal weapons for Kurdish separatists in Iraq is likely to face life in prison. A 54-year-old former paratrooper from Pennsylvania has become just the second American ever convicted of torture after allegedly abducting and abusing an employee at an illegal weapons plant meant to provide guns to Kurdish separatists in Iraq. A Monday release by the U.S. Justice Department has detailed. A jury on Friday unanimously found Rajo guilty of 39 counts of torture, arms smuggling, wire fraud and money laundering charges which carry a combined prison sentence of over 700 years. Sentencing guidelines suggest Rajo is likely to receive life in prison when his sentence is handed down in August. A release from the U.S. Department of Justice says Rajo arranged for Kurdish soldiers to abduct and detain the victim at a Kurdish military compound where the perpetrator suffocated the victim with a belt, threatened to cut off one of his fingers, and directed Kurdish soldiers to repeatedly beat, tase, choke, and otherwise physically and mentally abuse the victim over a 39-day period. The victim was employed at a weapons factory that Rajo was developing in the Kurdistan region of Iraq that was intended to manufacture M4 automatic rifles and Glock 9mm pistols, the statement explains. In connection with the weapons factory project, which included Rajo providing training to foreign persons in the operation, assembly, and manufacturing of the M4 automatic rifle, Rajo also illegally exported firearm parts that were controlled for export by the Departments of State and Commerce, the DOJ wrote. The release detailed the judgment marks the second ever American defendant to have been convicted of torture since the federal legislation was implemented in 1994. Before taking on the role, Rajo was implicated in a number of legally questionable financial schemes, including alleged attempts to defraud multiple business partners. Until his gun company folded, he spent years in the Special Forces haven of Fayetteville, North Carolina, before vanishing to Haiti, where he was accused of embezzling supplies from a charity aimed at helping Haitian earthquake victims. Rajo first came to Iraq in 2014 when he was brought in to manufacture pistols and assault rifles by Palad Talabani, a special forces commander who's heir to a Kurdish political dynasty known as the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. When he touched down in Erbil, prosecutors say Rajo brought sticky fingers with him. They allege he diverted millions of dollars, meant to purchase manufacturing equipment, for his own personal expenses, including Rolex watches and sports cars, one U.S. outlet explained. Throughout it all, Rajo reportedly insisted his actions carried the blessing of the Central Intelligence Agency. After he was first busted in an apparent attempt to smuggle gun manufacturing materials to Iraq, Rajo insisted the agents questioning him didn't have the appropriate clearance levels to continue the conversation. He subsequently claimed the agency instructed him to pass intelligence on to Talabani. Legal filings submitted by Rajo claimed the American Consul General in the Kurdish capital of Erbil, Ken Gross, had authorized him to build the weapons factory.